The classroom was thick with tension, though not a word was spoken. At the back of the room sat Elijah Hayes, arms crossed, his dark eyes locked onto the man at the front, Professor Douglas Whitaker. The professor spoke with that kind of effortless authority that made people listen, even when they didn't want to. But today, his words hit differently. This, Professor Whitaker declared, tapping the whiteboard with his marker, is precisely what I mean when I say that certain cultures have failed to contribute meaningfully to the progress of civilization. Elijah's jaw tensed. His fingers curled into fists beneath the desk. He'd heard comments like this before, not always this blunt, but the message was the same: racism, dressed up in academic jargon, designed to go unchallenged. Around him, a handful of black students shifted uncomfortably, while others buried their heads in their notes, hoping the moment would pass. But not Elijah. Whitaker continued, oblivious to the growing discomfort in the room. Statistics don't lie. Look at standardized test scores. Look at innovation. Centuries of data support this. Elijah shook his head in disbelief. Is he really going there? A hand shot up from the front row. Sophie Mitchell, a white student who often appeared uneasy during Whitaker's more inflammatory lectures, cleared her throat. Professor, I think some would argue that history's written by those in power. And when education and opportunity are systematically denied. Whitaker interrupted with an exaggerated sigh. Ah, the oppression argument. Convenient, but overused. We live in a meritocracy. Work hard, and you succeed. That's the American dream, isn't it? Elijah couldn't take it anymore. His chair screeched as he stood, drawing every eye in the room. Adjusting his sweatshirt, he spoke, his voice calm but laced with fire. Professor Whitaker, do you ever get tired of being wrong? A ripple of gasps filled the room. Some students widened their eyes in disbelief, others smirked, anticipating what was about to unfold. Whitaker turned, amusement flickering in his gaze. Ah, Mr. Hayes. I wondered when you'd chime in. Please, enlighten me. Elijah took a step forward, feeling the weight of the room's attention. You throw around stats and data like they're absolute truths, but you ignore the most important thing, context. You act like history started last week, like we all began at the same starting line. But that's not how this works. Black folks have been playing catch-up ever since they were brought to this country in chains. And everything that followed was designed to keep us there. A murmur spread through the class. Whitaker smirked. Ah, systemic racism, another convenient excuse. Elijah chuckled dryly. Excuse? You mean the reason schools in black neighborhoods get less funding? The reason black professionals have to work twice as hard for half the recognition? The reason people who look like me get followed in stores or pulled over for nothing? That's not an excuse, Professor, that's reality. The professor waved a dismissive hand. You're emotional, Elijah. And emotions cloud reason. I deal in facts. Whose facts? Elijah shot back. The ones you cherry-pick to fit your narrative? Because the real facts, the ones you conveniently skip over, show that black scholars, inventors, and leaders have been changing the world for centuries, despite every system working against them. For the first time, Whitaker's smile faltered. You love talking about meritocracy like it's real for everyone. But you know better. You stand here, in a university built on exclusion, acting like the playing field is level. You're not teaching facts. You're just repeating the same tired, racist garbage that's been used to keep people like me down for generations. The room was silent. Whitaker's face darkened. Are you calling me racist? Elijah tilted his head. I don't have to. You're proving it. Gasps echoed again. A few students now had their phones out, recording. If you don't like my class, Mr. Hayes, Whitaker seethed, you're welcome to leave. Elijah crossed his arms. See, that's the problem. You expect people like me to sit down and shut up when someone like you talks down to us. But I'm done being silent. Suddenly, a slow clap broke the silence. All heads turned toward the doorway, where Professor Dana Caldwell, head of the university's ethics department, stood with her arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. Whitaker paled. I was passing by when I overheard an interesting discussion, Professor Caldwell said as she stepped into the room. She nodded toward Elijah. That was quite the takedown, Mr. Hayes. Elijah gave her a slight nod. Her smile faded as she turned to Whitaker. Doug, do you always degrade entire racial groups in your lectures? Or was today a special occasion? Whitaker opened his mouth, but no words came out. Caldwell scanned the room. How many of you recorded this? Several hands went up, some hesitant, others bold. Good, she said. The university will want to know exactly what's being taught in its classrooms. Elijah's heart pounded, adrenaline surging. It wasn't over, But for once, he wasn't fighting alone. The campus buzzed in the aftermath. Some students whispered their support. Others avoided eye contact. Whitaker had stormed out after Caldwell's entrance, but Elijah knew this wasn't the end. Outside the building, Sophie caught up with him. "Elijah, that was incredible." He managed a small smile. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," she admitted, clutching her books. "I'm just worried. You know how the school is. They'll try to flip this on you." Elijah sighed. He knew. "I'm not letting that happen." "Good. I've got your back." Before he could respond, a voice called out, "Mr. Hayes." They turned. Professor Caldwell stood near the faculty offices, motioning for him to follow. Elijah shot Sophie a look. "Here we go." Inside Caldwell's office, books on ethics lined the walls. She gestured for him to sit. "You stirred things up today," she said. "I just called it like it was." She smirked. "The administration's already aware. Half your class had their phones out." Then they saw the truth. They did. But don't expect them to act on it willingly. Elijah's jaw clenched. "So Whitaker gets away with it?" "Not if you're smart about your next move. He has tenure. Firing him won't be easy, and the university cares more about its image than the truth. So what do I do?" "You make it loud enough that they can't ignore it." That night, Elijah posted on social media. "Today, my professor made it clear that he doesn't respect black students. When I called him out, he dismissed it. When confronted, he walked out. Now, the university wants to keep it quiet. I say no. If this has happened to you, speak up. #expose Whitaker." The response was immediate. By morning, students shared their own stories, Whitaker's microaggressions, dismissive comments, and years of unchecked bias. The hashtag trended across campus, then beyond. By noon, local news had picked up the story. The university, pressured, released a statement. "We take student concerns seriously and are conducting an internal review." But Elijah wasn't satisfied. Neither were the students. That afternoon, dozens gathered in the campus courtyard. Signs read, "No hate in our classrooms," and "Education without racism." Chants echoed as the protests swelled, students, faculty, community members joining in. At the front of the march, Elijah spotted Whitaker near the administration building. Their eyes met. Elijah approached. "Still think this is just emotional?" Whitaker's usual smugness was gone. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Elijah's laugh was cold. "No. This is what happens when people get tired of being silenced." Whitaker sneered. "You think this will get me fired?" Elijah shrugged. "That's not up to me. But people know who you are now." And this time, Whitaker had no comeback. The university held an emergency forum days later. Students packed the auditorium. University officials sat on stage, Professor Whitaker among them, his face unreadable. Students demanded accountability. Whitaker tried to defend himself. "My lectures are designed to challenge students." Elijah stood. "Challenge? You demean black people as a whole. That's not critical thinking. That's racism." The room erupted in applause. Then Professor Caldwell stood. "I've been here 15 years. I've watched brilliant black students be dismissed and degraded. And I'm tired of it. It's time we stop protecting the wrong people." The crowd roared. The next morning, the university placed Whitaker on administrative leave pending further investigation. It wasn't an outright firing, but it was the beginning of the end. Elijah sat in the campus lounge, scrolling through messages of support. Sophie dropped into the seat beside him. "You did it," she said. He smiled. "We did. What now?" "Now," Elijah replied, "we make sure this never happens again. Because this fight wasn't over, not by a long shot."